I'm Caitlin Reynolds, 34 years old, and I still remember the exact moment I saw that moving truck in my driveway. The wheels were still turning, boxes stacked like someone meant to stay for good. My sister stood on the lawn, clipboard in hand, giving directions like she owned the place. My front door was wide open, like I didn't even live there anymore. I'd been gone 4 days on business. I wasn't supposed to be home yet before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if you've ever had to draw a line with your own family, go ahead and tap that subscribe button. I grew up just outside of Portland in a quiet neighborhood called Juniper Hill. We lived in a modest brick house with a sloped roof and creaky wooden porch. Swing's my mother Evelyn worked as a nurse at the county hospital, and my father Richard ran a small construction business. He built decks in the summer and repaired basements in the winter. We never had much, but I used to think we had each other. I was the middle child. The quiet one, the one who got along with everybody. My sister Madison was older by 2 years. Loud, bold, always got the last word. Connor was the baby. Charming, always forgiven, even when he shouldn't have been. It was the kind of family where the rules bent for some and snapped for others. I learned early to keep the peace, even when it didn't feel fair. Our house was loud during the holidays, full of casseroles and card games, and my father's laugh echoing off the walls. But everything changed after the recession. In '08, Dad's business folded almost overnight, and he took to drinking the way some men take to prayer. By the time I was 17, the warmth in our home had turned brittle. Mom picked up double shifts, and Madison vanished back to college the night they told us about the divorce. I didn't say much. I just sat on the stairs and watched as Madison shouted, and Connor cried, and Mom stood with her arms crossed like she was finally done pretending after that. It felt like we were 5 people in 5 different houses, even though we were still under one roof. I went away to college 4 hours south, studied real estate, worked part-time, and came home less and less. I still sent money, though, for Connor's books, for Madison's car repairs, for the leaky roof my mother said was caving in. Everyone always seemed to need something, and I always seemed to be the one who had just enough to give. I started building a life, one commission at a time, when I finally earned enough to start looking for a house of my own. I remember Madison asking me for $25,000. She said she was starting a boutique. No plan, no budget, just a number, and a smile. I said, no, not cruelly, just firmly. And that night they all told me I wasn't really part of the family anymore. I hadn't seen or heard from them in 5 years. Not a single birthday call, not even when I made senior agent at my firm. But then my Aunt Patricia passed. She was my father's sister, quiet and kind, loved libraries and lilacs and crossword puzzles. She left me her home, a 1920s craftsman tucked beneath sycamore trees with stained glass windows and a porch swing, like the one we had when I was little. It was the first time in years I felt like I could exhale, like I was standing on solid ground again. I repainted the shutters and filled the cupboards and brought in my books and my quilts and the coffee mugs I'd collected from all those lonely years in new cities and quiet apartments. That house felt like a heartbeat, steady and sure, and mine. But that morning when I came back early from Seattle and saw the moving truck in the driveway, when I saw Madison on the lawn and my mother stepping out from behind my front door, when I saw Connor measuring something with a clipboard, and no one noticed me standing there, suitcase still in hand, I knew whatever peace I had found was about to be shattered again. When I stepped onto the porch, my keys still in hand, Madison dropped her clipboard. It clattered against the concrete like something had shattered. A stranger stood by the moving truck, holding one end of a coffee table I didn't recognize. My mother was in the doorway. Behind her, Connor was crouched near the wall with a notepad and measuring tape. No one spoke. Not right away. "What's going on here?" I asked. Madison blinked, then tried to smile. "You weren't supposed to be home until Monday." "That's your explanation," I said, "that I wasn't supposed to see you moving into my house." "We're not moving in," she said, brushing dust from her skirt. "We were just dropping off a few things. Family heirlooms. Mom thought it would be a nice surprise." I stepped inside. The living room had been rearranged. My side chair was pushed against the wall. The bookshelf near the front window was empty. In the kitchen, the cabinet doors were open, some of the contents shuffled around. A new set of pots sat on the counter. My voice stayed low. "This is not a few heirlooms, Madison." Mom followed me in. Caitlin, sweetheart, don't overreact. There's a very reasonable explanation. I'm listening. She smiled soft, like she used to when I was a child. Well, once we heard Patricia had left you this big house, we were thrilled for you. But it didn't make sense for you to rattle around in it all alone. I said nothing. She kept going. Madison and Derek's lease is up next week. Rent's outrageous. You know how it is. And I've been having some health issues. We thought it just made sense to move in together. Help each other out. Help each other out, I repeated. And did you plan to ask me before or after you moved the furniture and Connor appeared in the hallway? We thought you'd be happy, he said, his voice tentative. You used to say you missed having the family together. That was before you told me I didn't have a family, I said. Outside, a minivan pulled up. Derek stepped out. There were 2 car seats in the back. He looked confused. Why aren't they bringing the boxes in, he called. I walked past my mother and stood on the porch. Get out, I said. All of you. Get out of my house right now. Mom's tone shifted. Now, Caitlin, I know this is a surprise, but let's not make a scene. This isn't a surprise, I said. This is trespassing. You would call the police on your own family, Madison asked. You're not my family. Not after what you said. And not after what you're trying to do. Madison opened her mouth to respond, but she didn't get the chance. I pulled out my phone. They thought I wouldn't do it, but I did. The officers arrived 10 minutes later, calm, professional, efficient. I handed over my ID and the deed. They asked my family to leave. One officer helped Derek repack the boxes into the truck. The other explained to my mother that this was private property. We've already given notice on our apartment, Madison said, her voice rising. Where are we supposed to go? That's not Ms. Reynolds' responsibility, the officer replied. I stood on the porch, arms folded, watching as the truck pulled away. Madison rolled down the window. This isn't over, she shouted. Family is forever, whether you like it or not. The house was quiet after they left. I locked the door and sat on the floor of the living room. The silence pressed in, but it wasn't peaceful. Not this time. Something had shifted. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, the phone calls started. First from Madison, then Connor, then Mom. When I stopped answering, they left voicemails, tearful messages, angry ones. Connor begged me to call Mom. Madison said her children were sleeping on an air mattress. My mother accused me of abandoning them in their time of need. I saved every message. That Monday, I tried to go back to work. I had clients waiting. Listings to update. I stepped into the office just before noon and heard my name at the front desk. I'm her mother, my mother was saying. It's an emergency. I froze. Alicia, our receptionist, looked up at me. Do you want me to ask her to leave? It's all right, I said. I'll handle it. We went into the small conference room near the break area. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue still in costume. The hair, the cardigan, even her voice was a performance. Caitlin. I'm worried about you, she said, living all alone in that big house, cutting yourself off from everyone. I'm not alone, I said, and you're not welcome at my workplace. This isn't like you, she said, shaking her head. Patricia's death hit you harder than you realize. I know you think you're fine, but you're not thinking clearly. You need to leave. You care more about your job than your own family. Respect and trust, I said. That's what relationships are built on. You've shown me neither. She didn't argue after that, just stood up and walked out. Later that day, I found Connor waiting outside my gym. He waved like nothing had happened. The day after that, I saw Madison at my usual coffee shop. They were showing up everywhere. 10 days after the moving truck, I came home from work and found 2 children sitting on my porch. A small suitcase rested between them. The girl looked up. Are you Aunt Caitlin? I nodded. Mommy said to wait here. She had to run errands. They were on my porch for 5 hours. No note, no call. Madison didn't answer her phone. I gave them dinner, let them draw with colored pencils I found in a drawer. When Madison finally arrived, she acted like nothing was wrong. They've been dying to get to know their aunt, she said. I told her not to do that again. I kept my voice low. Don't use your kids like this. We didn't have anyone else. Derek had to work. I had an interview. Then you call and ask. You don't leave children on someone's porch. Oh, please. It's family helping family. That phrase again, over and over, as if it made everything acceptable. 3 weeks after the moving truck, I woke at 2:17 in the morning. Someone was pounding on my door. I checked the camera. It was Connor. Drunk, yelling, rattling the doorknob. He tried the side window. I called the police. They arrived fast, found him still trying to open a window. The officer asked if I wanted to press charges. "He's my brother," I said. "Family issues can be complicated," he said. But what he did wasn't legal. Connor was escorted off the property with a warning. The next day I called Thomas. "You need a restraining order," he said. "This isn't just stress. This is escalating." He was right. A few days later, the paperwork was filed. A judge reviewed the evidence, voicemails, police reports, camera footage, and approved it. For the first time in weeks, the calls stopped. The quiet returned. But it wouldn't last. The first few days after the restraining order were quiet. I started sleeping through the night again. I caught up on paperwork, cleared out the fridge, even took a walk around Laurelhurst Park without checking over my shoulder. For 3 weeks, the silence held. Then came the whispers. Rachel heard the first one. A woman at her co-working space mentioned she'd seen my mother at the grocery store talking about me. She said, "You'd had a breakdown," Rachel told me over lunch, "that you've been unstable since your aunt passed." I set my fork down. "She told Mrs. Bennett too," Rachel added, "from your high school. Said you were isolating, not eating, imagining threats. It didn't stop there. A former client emailed to cancel a showing. No explanation. 2 more did the same later that week." At the office, I noticed how quickly conversations stopped when I entered the break room. Martin didn't say anything, but he watched me more closely than before. Then came the most damaging story of all, that I had manipulated Patricia in her final years, that she'd meant to leave the house to the whole family, that I'd taken advantage of her declining health. None of it was true. Patricia had been sharp until the end. Her will had been updated multiple times. Mr. Harmon, her attorney, had reviewed every version with her. But facts don't spread as fast as rumors. "I heard Madison broke down crying at your cousin's house," Rachel told me one night. "Said you shut out your family and stole their inheritance." I sat in silence. I didn't know what to say. By the end of that month, I had lost 2 listings. A couple I'd worked with for 6 months chose another agent. Someone anonymous left a negative review on my business profile. No name, just unstable. Avoid. I scheduled a meeting with Martin. I brought printed documentation of the restraining order, copies of the voicemails, and a signed letter from Mr. Harmon verifying Patricia's will. "I'm handling it," I said, "but I want you to hear it from me." Martin nodded slowly. "It doesn't match anything I know about you," he said, "but you've been here long enough to know how quickly perception can shift in this business." That night I turned off my phone and went to bed early. I woke at 3 a.m., heart pounding, unsure why. By the following week, I'd started losing weight. Food didn't taste like anything. My clothes hung loose at the shoulders. My cheeks looked drawn in the mirror. I saw the worry in Rachel's eyes during dinner. "You're letting them get to you," she said gently. "They're poisoning your life, and you're letting them." "What can I do?" I asked. "They're not contacting me directly anymore." "No," she said. "They're just working around the edges. It's still a siege." She was right. I hadn't noticed it at first, but they'd shifted tactics. Less direct, more destructive. The next afternoon, I was at Thomas's office for our weekly check-in. Halfway through our conversation, my phone buzzed with a security notification. Someone was at my front door. I pulled up the feed. Mr. Harmon stood on my porch. "I need to take this," I told Thomas. Mr. Harmon looked serious when I opened the door. He held a thick envelope. "I didn't want to alarm you," he said, "but your family has contacted my office several times this week. They're challenging the will." I didn't answer right away. "They're claiming Patricia was no longer of sound mind," he continued, "and that you influenced her decisions." "She was perfectly clear," I said. "You know that, I do. And my records support that. But a will contest can be messy, even if it has no real foundation." He paused. "They're not trying to win. They're trying to wear you down." That night, I updated Rachel. She nodded slowly. "They're escalating," she said. "This isn't just about living in your house anymore. They're trying to take it from you." The next morning, Martin called me into his office again. "Caitlin, I've received a few anonymous calls," he said, uncomfortable. "Allegations about your conduct. that you manipulated a dying woman, that you've been mistreating family. I handed him the restraining order again. I have documentation. If you'd like to speak with Patricia's attorney, he'll confirm everything. I believe you, Martin said, but not everyone will. That's the reality we're in. For the rest of that week, I kept my head down at work, but the silence at the office grew louder. No one joined me for coffee runs. People stopped copying me on group emails. I started therapy 2 days later. Dr. Winters was calm and straightforward. She listened more than she spoke. "You're grieving," she said after our 3rd session. "Not just Patricia. You're grieving the family you thought you had. The idea of what it could have been." She was right. I hadn't said that out loud before. At home, I kept busy. I repainted the kitchen walls. I started cleaning closets I hadn't opened in months. I rearranged the living room. One night, while scrubbing the tile near the sink, I found a small dent in the floor, molding fresh just beneath the back window. I checked the security footage. Nothing showed. The next day, I installed motion detectors inside the house. Then I bought new locks and had them changed again. 2 days later, Mrs. Finley knocked on my door holding a peach cobbler. "I should have said something sooner," she said. "But I didn't want to worry you. Said something about what your sister. She's been stopping by. Only when your car's gone. Sometimes your mother, too." My hands tightened on the plate. "They said they were dropping things off for you, picking things up you forgot. I thought it was arranged. It wasn't." "Oh, dear," she said softly. "She told me you were struggling, that you weren't remembering things clearly." I sat down on the porch steps. The cobbler sat beside me untouched. "There's something else," Mrs. Finley said. "A realtor came by last week, asked for you. She said she had an appointment about listing the property with the Reynolds family. Did she leave a name, Alicia Martinez? Her card's in my drawer. I called Alicia that night. I was confused when no one answered," she said. "Your mother called, said the family had inherited the home and needed to sell quickly." The next morning, I went straight to Thomas's office. "They're trying to sell my house," I said, laying the business card on his desk. "They've been inside while I'm at work." Thomas didn't look surprised. He just nodded. "Then it's time we make a plan." Thomas listened as I went through everything: Mrs. Finley's warning, the realtor's visit, the altered stories. When I finished, he pulled out a legal pad and made a list. "We need to document every attempt they've made to misrepresent ownership," he said. "That includes contacting an agent entering the home and claiming mental instability on your part." He referred me to a lawyer named Catherine Walsh. She specialized in estate fraud and family disputes. I met with her the next day. "What your family's doing isn't just morally wrong," Catherine said. "It may rise to the level of criminal fraud." She leaned back in her chair. "We'll keep gathering evidence, but be prepared if they've come this far they might not stop." That night I couldn't sleep. Rachel offered to stay over just in case. We sat on the couch with chamomile tea going over everything one more time. She opened a notebook and started organizing the details. Dates, times, names, what happened, who witnessed it. "Let's get ahead of them," she said. "Let's build a timeline before they rewrite the story again." Over the next few days, I gathered everything I could. Voicemails, camera footage, photos of rearranged rooms, the business card from Alicia Martinez. I even found a crumpled flyer in my recycling bin. Understanding Squatters' Rights in Oregon. Certain sections were highlighted. It was clear now. They weren't acting out of impulse. They'd done research. They had a plan. I called my security company and upgraded everything: window sensors, interior cameras, remote access. I changed the locks again, even though I'd already done it once. Then I booked a professional to sweep the house for any hidden devices. He didn't find any microphones or cameras, but he did notice something strange in the living room. A notebook wedged deep between the couch cushions. It wasn't mine. Inside were pages of handwritten notes in Madison's handwriting lists of furniture calculations of what the house might sell for estimated agent commissions. On the final page was a rough timeline titled Caitlin Removal Plan. Each step was numbered: copy keys, enter while away, move in essential items, establish mail delivery. One line simply read, medication strategy. I stared at it for a long time. I put the notebook in a sealed evidence bag and called Michael Blake, the private investigator Thomas had recommended earlier. He picked up on the second ring. "What's going on?" I told him what I'd found. "Don't stay there tonight," he said. "Go to a friend's, somewhere they don't know." Rachel didn't hesitate. She made up the guest room, changed the sheets, set out towels. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I went back to Thomas and gave him the notebook. "This changes things," he said. "It confirms intent. They weren't just pushing boundaries, they were executing a strategy." He contacted Catherine, and together they began building a formal case. They wanted more evidence, especially something recent proof that my family hadn't backed off. It was Catherine who suggested the idea of a sting. "They've shown a pattern," she said. "They act when they think you're away. We could give them another opportunity. Let them incriminate themselves on camera." It felt risky, but I didn't have many options left. Rachel agreed to help coordinate. She'd monitor the cameras. We'd have officers standing by. The house would look empty. I'd pretend to leave town for a conference. We needed to make it convincing. So I told a few colleagues about a work trip. I let it slip during coffee breaks and casual meetings. I even booked a hotel room near the airport in case anyone checked. The night before I was set to leave, I packed a suitcase and walked to the curb with it. I got into a rideshare, let the driver drop me at the hotel, then quietly made my way to a different location nearby. I stayed at a short-term rental under a friend's name. Rachel set up her laptop with live access to the cameras. She checked in every few hours. The first day passed quietly, the second day nothing. Then on the third morning, the motion alert came through. "Madison and Derek just parked down the street," Rachel texted. "They're walking around the house now." I watched the live feed from my phone. Madison pressed her face to the front window. Derek rattled the back door. After 10 minutes, they left. I thought that might be it. But at 10:17 the next morning, they came back with my mother and Connor. This time, Connor disappeared behind the house. The side camera caught him prying at a window I deliberately left unsecured. It gave way after a few tugs. One by one they entered. Rachel alerted the police. Plainclothes officers were already nearby. Within minutes they moved in. I arrived as they were being led out in handcuffs. Madison was the first to see me. "You set us up," she said. "This is entrapment." "No," I said. "This is evidence." Connor didn't speak. My mother tried tears. Derek looked like he wanted to vanish. Catherine handed me a clipboard. "These are the formal complaints, criminal and civil. Once filed, they're permanent. Are you sure?" I looked at my family standing in the driveway of a house they'd tried to take. I thought of Aunt Patricia, of the notebook, of the voices I'd heard through my front door. "I'm sure," I said. As they were placed into separate vehicles, I saw Connor glance back at me. He didn't look angry, just tired, like he finally understood. Back at Rachel's that evening, we sat in silence for a while. She passed me a glass of water. I looked out the window at the quiet street. The siege was over, or so I thought. The morning after the arrests, Catherine called with an update. She'd already been in contact with the district attorney's office. The charges were being processed, breaking and entering violation of a restraining order, attempted fraud, and criminal trespass. "Connor may receive reduced charges," she said. "His behavior was different on camera, and he cooperated during the arrest." I nodded. That makes sense. Later that day, Thomas joined us for a strategy meeting. We reviewed the footage again frame by frame, each moment documented, each action visible. Catherine compiled everything into a formal complaint, both civil and criminal. By the end of the week, their attorney reached out. "They're offering a settlement," Catherine said during our call. "In exchange for reduced charges and no jail time, they'll sign permanent restraining orders. They'll also agree not to contest the will or the ownership of the property ever again." "And restitution?" I asked. "They're willing to cover your legal fees," she confirmed. "We can also request community service and mandatory counseling as part of the probation terms." I didn't answer right away. "You don't have to decide today," Catherine said, "but this will likely be the only offer before trial proceedings begin." That evening, I walked the perimeter of the house. The hydrangeas Aunt Patricia had planted were blooming near the porch. The garden beds still needed weeding. I stood there for a long time. The next morning, I agreed to the settlement with one addition. Counseling would be mandatory, not just a requirement on paper, but attendance verified by a court-approved provider. Catherine submitted the request. It was accepted. 2 weeks later, everything was finalized. My mother, Madison, and Derek received 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution payments. Connor received a lesser sentence, 1 year of probation and fewer service hours, but the same conditions applied. None of them were allowed within 100 yards of me or my home again. The relief was immediate, but so was the stillness that followed. I kept attending therapy. Dr. Winters helped me navigate the weeks that came next. "You're not just recovering from what they did," she said. "You're mourning what never was." I focused on reclaiming my space. I had the walls painted soft blue, replaced the drapes, moved Aunt Patricia's reading chair into the sunroom, and filled the shelves with the books we'd once shared. I tore out the overgrown hedge out front and planted a row of hydrangeas in its place. Mrs. Finley came by one Saturday afternoon with a mason jar of sweet tea and a tin of lemon cookies. "Patricia would have loved this," she said, glancing around the porch. "You've made it a home again." I started inviting people over for dinner. Rachel brought peach cobbler. Thomas showed up with a bottle of red wine and stories from work. The table that once felt too big was suddenly full again. By fall, things at the office had improved. Martin gradually assigned me new clients. Word of mouth helped repair what rumors had tried to ruin. One afternoon in early November, a letter arrived at Catherine's office. She called to confirm it before forwarding it to me. It was from Connor. The envelope was plain, the handwriting neat. "Caitlin, I know you don't owe me anything. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I've been going to counseling like the court ordered. At first I didn't think it mattered, but now I see the patterns, the way Mom pitted us against each other, the way we let it happen. None of that excuses what I did. I followed her lead instead of thinking for myself. I saw the way they treated you, and I stayed silent. I have a son now. His name is Lucas. He's 2. I want to raise him differently, to be better than we were. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm trying. Connor." I folded the letter twice and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't respond at first. A week later, during my next session, Dr. Winters asked about it. "What's holding you back? I'm not sure it's real," I said. "I don't want to be pulled back in. What would a response look like that protects your boundaries, but acknowledges his effort?" It took me a few more days, but eventually I sent a short reply through Catherine's office. "Connor, thank you for your letter. I appreciate the apology and your commitment to counseling. I hope you continue to do the work, especially for your son's sake. I'm not ready for contact beyond this, but I wanted you to know I received your words. Caitlin." I never heard back directly, but 3 weeks later, I received a donation receipt from the Patricia Reynolds Foundation. The donor was listed as C. Reynolds. The note said only, "Thank you for honoring her the way you have." By winter, the house felt different, lighter. I caught myself humming in the mornings while making coffee. I cleared out the guest room and turned it into a small studio space with a desk and sketchpad, just a place to think. One afternoon, while walking through Laurelhurst Park, I ran into Mrs. Finley again. She was walking with her grandson, Jack. He introduced himself politely, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Architecture student," he said with a smile. "Home for the semester." We started talking about the old houses in the neighborhood, what made them special, how they aged, how to care for them. A few days later, he dropped off a book on craftsman restoration techniques. Inside was a note with his number. The conversation continued, and the next chapter of my life, unexpected quiet and healing, began to unfold. The first time Jack and I walked through the neighborhood together, it felt easy. He knew every architectural detail, gable angles, porch columns, even the window trims. I mostly just liked how quiet he was. By spring, he was spending more evenings on the porch with me. Sometimes we didn't talk. Other times we'd walk through the backyard and he'd point out spots where drainage might need work or where the foundation showed wear. I wasn't looking for anything serious, but he didn't ask for more than I could give. One Sunday, I invited Rachel Thomas and Mrs. Finley over for dinner. Jack brought a casserole and offered to fix the loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen. He fit in like he'd been around forever. After everyone left, he lingered behind and helped clean up. As he was drying a plate, he asked softly, "Do you think your family's really finished?" I didn't answer right away. The next morning, Catherine called with news. Madison and Derek had divorced. Their financial situation had gotten worse since the settlement. Evelyn had moved to Arizona and hadn't attended a single counseling session. Her case had been flagged as non-compliant. Connor, on the other hand, had completed every requirement. His therapist had submitted glowing reports. He'd found steady work and was current on child support. Catherine read his latest compliance update aloud and paused. "There's something else," she said. "He asked through his attorney if he could send you something." "What kind of something?" "A photo of his son." "Lucas." I agreed. The envelope arrived 2 days later. Inside was a small photograph, just a toddler at a park, grinning with a sippy cup. Taped to the back was a note, "He's why I'm trying." I didn't reply, but I kept the picture. I placed it in a small box in my desk drawer, alongside Aunt Patricia's letter and Connor's apology. That same week, Martin called me into his office again. I assumed it was about work, but instead he closed the door and smiled. "I wanted to say something," he said. "You've handled all of this with more grace than I can imagine. I've seen what this sort of pressure does to people. But you stayed steady." He handed me a folder. Inside was a promotion offer lead agent with oversight of 2 junior team members. I accepted on the spot. That weekend I stood on the back porch and watched the wind move through Patricia's garden. The daisies were starting to bloom again. It had been a year since the day I came home early from Seattle and found the moving truck in my driveway. I never imagined things would lead here. By mid-May, the Patricia Reynolds Foundation was fully operational. We had a small office downtown staffed by volunteers, many of them young adults who had gone through estrangement themselves. We offered housing assistance therapy referrals and career mentorship. The first fundraiser brought in more than I expected. Jack built the donation landing page himself. Rachel handled the outreach. Thomas did the legal paperwork. Even Martin made a personal donation, along with a note for the ones who survived the storm. In early June, I received an email from a woman named Natalie who had found the foundation through a support group. Her message was simple: "I just need to know if starting over is really possible." I called her that night. We talked for over an hour. Later, as I stood in the kitchen rinsing my coffee mug, I saw something in the corner of the yard. A blue butterfly perched on the edge of Patricia's old planter box. It stayed there a long time. That summer, Jack and I began planning a small renovation to the back of the house. Nothing dramatic, just new windows and better insulation. He mapped it out in a sketch pad and taped it to the fridge. We worked quietly most weekends, removing trim, sanding old panels, repainting wood. It was during one of those Saturdays that Connor texted through his attorney again. This time he asked to meet for coffee in a public place, nothing more. I thought about it for a few days before saying yes. We met at a diner near the courthouse. I recognized him right away, though he looked thinner than I remembered. He stood when I walked in, hands tucked in the front pocket of his jacket. We sat in a booth near the window. He didn't rush the conversation. "I don't want anything," he said quietly. "I just wanted to say thank you for not shutting the door completely." I nodded. He pulled out a small envelope. "I brought this in case you ever wanted to write to Lucas. Just photos and a drawing he made." I accepted it but didn't open it right away. We talked for another 20 minutes, about nothing urgent, just updates. When I stood to leave, he didn't ask for another meeting. Just offered a quiet, "Take care," and slipped out through the side door. Back at home, I sat on the porch and opened the envelope. Inside were 3 photographs: Lucas in a red sweater, Lucas at a pumpkin patch, Lucas holding a crayon drawing that looked like stick figures under a yellow sun. There was no note, just the pictures. That evening, Jack brought over fresh basil from the farmer's market. He looked at the photos without asking questions and passed me a glass of water. "I think Patricia would be proud," he said, "of all of it." I didn't answer right away, but I stayed quiet long enough for the moment to settle around us. Later that night, I went into the backyard and turned on the small porch light. The garden looked soft in the glow. The world hadn't gone back to what it was, but maybe that was never the goal. The Foundation's second annual gathering was held in early September. We rented the back room of a local library, the same one where Patricia used to volunteer on weekends. The chairs didn't match, and the coffee came in paper cups, but the room was full. I opened the meeting with a brief thank you, then stepped aside while others shared their stories. One young woman, Betrayal, spoke about leaving home at 19 after years of emotional neglect. Another named Monica talked about couch surfing through her 20s and finally finding stable housing through the Foundation's new rental voucher program. I sat near the back listening. Jack arrived during the second hour, still in his university jacket, and took a seat quietly beside me. When the room emptied out, we helped fold chairs and gather brochures. Before we left, he reached into his backpack and handed me a small envelope. "I know it's early," he said, "but I thought maybe this belonged somewhere." Inside was a proposal, a concept sketch for a memorial bench engraved with Patricia's name and placed near the garden in my backyard. I didn't say anything right away, but I kept the envelope in my hand the entire ride home. That week I took some time off work to focus on the garden. I cleared the weeds, freshened the mulch, and planted a row of white asters beneath the old magnolia. On the bench we later installed, the inscription was simple, "In memory of Patricia Reynolds for the roots that hold even when branches break." Mrs. Finley visited a few days after it was finished. She sat with me quietly for a while, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a photo. "It's from the summer she retired," she said, handing it to me. "That trip to Cannon Beach, you remember her telling you about it?" I nodded. The photo showed Patricia barefoot in the sand holding a seashell and smiling at something just out of frame. "I think she'd be proud of you," Mrs. Finley said, "not just for what you've done with the house, but the way you kept your heart." That evening I found myself flipping through old messages I'd saved, emails, cards, voicemails. Some from Aunt Patricia, a few from early clients, one from Thomas sent after the settlement thanking me for trusting him. I hadn't realized how much of my strength came from quiet moments like those. Toward the end of September, I got a call from the director of the local historical society. Someone had nominated my house for consideration in a preservation grant. I asked who submitted the paperwork. "Your neighbor," she said, "Jack Finley." I smiled. When I mentioned it to Jack later that week, he shrugged. "It's a beautiful house, and it has a story worth preserving." I invited him to stay for dinner. We ate on the porch while the sun went down. At one point he reached for my hand. I let him take it. A few days later I received a small box in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single object, the same keychain Madison had stolen from Patricia's front hall all those years ago. The brass fob with the carved oak leaf. It had always hung near the staircase. There was no note, no explanation. I showed it to Catherine the next day. She looked it over carefully, then returned it to its wrapping. "They're quiet now," she said, "but it's good to stay prepared." That night I placed the keychain back on the hook by the stairs. It clicked softly against the wall. The following week, Rachel called with news. She'd accepted a position out of state, working with a nonprofit that provided transitional housing for women aging out of foster care. "I wouldn't have had the courage to say yes if it weren't for what we built here," she said. We had one last dinner together on the porch, just the two of us. Afterward, she handed me a small wrapped package. I figured, it's your turn to keep the emergency pie tin. It was the same scratched-up tin we'd used during the worst weeks, the one she'd always filled with cinnamon crumble when things felt unsteady. After she left, I cleaned the tin and placed it on the shelf above the oven. In October, I spoke at a panel downtown for young professionals navigating family estrangement. The room was filled mostly with women in their 30s and 40s, many of them quiet, unsure whether they belonged. I told them about Aunt Patricia's kindness, about the garden, about what it meant to build safety one boundary at a time. Afterward, one of them approached me. Her name was Lydia. She said, "I don't have a house yet, but I'm planting herbs on my apartment balcony." "That counts, right?" I nodded. The following Saturday, Connor texted through his attorney once again. This time, it wasn't about another meeting. He wanted to send a birthday card for Patricia. She always remembered, he wrote, "And I don't think Lucas will ever know her, but I want him to hear her name in our house." I gave my permission. The card arrived a few days later. It was handmade construction paper and stickers with a toddler's handprint in the middle. On the back, in Connor's writing, were 6 words, "She helped me even after." I placed the card beside Patricia's photo in the hallway, just beneath the old light fixture she never wanted replaced. That night, Jack sat with me in the backyard as the wind picked up. The last of the asters bent toward the soil. "I think it's time," he said gently. "Whenever you're ready." I knew what he meant. Jack waited beside me in the garden. As the air grew cooler, the leaves rustling gently above Patricia's memorial bench. I looked around the house, the porch light glowing in the dusk, the flowers I'd planted for her. For so long, my world had been shaped by conflict and loss, each step forward shadowed by the past. But that evening, as the last of the sunlight slipped away, I realized how much life had changed. We sat in quiet company for a while. Jack reached for my hand, and I let myself lean in, no longer bracing for disappointment. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace, soft and real, settling deep in my chest. The old wounds weren't gone, but they no longer owned the house. Inside, I passed by the photo of Aunt Patricia on the hallway table, her eyes bright even in the faded print. The birthday card from Connor and Lucas stood beside it, a simple reminder of all the ways we try to make things right, even when we can't start over. The emergency pie tin still sat above the oven, waiting for the next Sunday dinner, another quiet tradition continuing on. Some days, Mrs. Finley would visit and tell stories from years before I arrived. Sometimes Rachel called from out of state, her laughter as bright as ever through the phone. Jack and I found our rhythm in small things: afternoon walks, quiet breakfasts, plans for the foundation's next project. Even my work, once filled with tension and gossip, had become something steady again. I was trusted, respected, and most important at home in my own life. There were scars, but there was also new growth. I'd learned that true family isn't determined by who shares your blood or your last name, but by who stays, who listens, and who shows up when it matters most. Justice in the end was never about seeing others punished, but about reclaiming what was taken and protecting the dignity that no one had the right to steal. As summer faded into fall, I watched the garden turn golden and thought of Patricia's words. "Let this house be your sanctuary." I think in the end it truly became one not just for me, but for every soul who crossed its threshold, seeking a safe place to begin again. If you've ever had to rebuild after betrayal or learn to grow something beautiful from what was broken, I hope this story reminds you, you are not alone, and you have the right to choose the family you need. Thank you for listening, and if my journey touched something in you, I invite you to share your own or simply take a moment to honor the quiet strength you carry.